It is 2 o'clock, and it's Tuesday afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you today for the Pastor's Chat. And how are you? How was your weekend? I saw some of you, or you saw me, on Sunday at the worship service at 10:30, and some of you watched it later. This past week, I think we had 75 households viewed our gathering and listened to the sermon. Some listened to the sermon only, some listened to the music. Thank you for your feedback on the gathering, and we hope it's helpful in strengthening faith, which is what this is all about. So today we continue on a theme. If you're one of the regulars, and there are quite a few of you who are regular, either live during the day or in the evening as you're making supper, or sometimes some of you tell me in the morning. Try to be aware of all the settings in which you are engaging in and listening to this conversation between a pastor and a person out there walking around. And I always start with the hope and the assumption that you are okay, whatever that means. It doesn't mean that your life is perfect. It just means that you're not in the situation right now where you're desperate for help. If you are, and you very well may be, I encourage you to send me a notification. I will respond. Send it to revlouie, REVLOUIE, at AOL.com, or you can call the church office. Just as I went to tell you what the church telephone number is, I cannot tell you. I'll have that for you before we're finished here. In fact, the telephone number is 201-891-0511. And 201-891-0511. That's just in case you don't have access to a computer where you could type in an email, or if you don't do email, and you're in a situation where you're not okay. I'm not saying I'll be the one to provide the answer or help your problem, but I can do the connecting part to help you to get to somebody who can help you. Times are tumultuous. Deaths from pandemic are high. Depression is very high among the population. Feelings of despair, worry is high. And all those areas are places where a pastor goes to work. I don't have a cure, but I have survival plans and work often in that environment. So I want to say, when I ask you how you are, I don't want it to just be an empty echo of a question out to you. And I'm praying that you are okay. But I don't make that assumption. So here we are in the season of Epiphany, and I am trying to do kind of a guided meditation in terms of what is this season about. So the church, when I mean the Church of Jesus Christ, the broad umbrella under the Church of Jesus Christ, always seems to have a component of nurture or education. And there's a starting point, which is where you are in your faith journey. I believe in God. I don't believe in God. I don't know what God wants from me. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it means to follow Jesus. All these things. And the church has said that as a community, we cannot just leave each other where we are. We need to provide a process of learning. Let's organize it, right? Let's organize it. And that organization has always found its way into looking at the season and responding in the season to say, well, what part of the Christian life begs to be taught in this time of year? What part of it? What part of being a Christian should I turn my mind to and say, okay, it's January. Christmas, we know that story, that narrative. We explore it for all it's worth, for strengthening our faith and our understanding of God and of the Bible, and all. We explore that. Oh my goodness, we explore that. Now we're in the next season after that. We're ahead of Lent. Lent is the 40 days that leads up to Easter, and we have a lot to learn and self-reflection that goes on in that season. But in this season, ushered in by the biblical account of the arrival of Magi from the Far East. There's a global element to Christianity. Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection were not just for the closed community of the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. It was good news for all the world. And so there's a global dimension, not global domination, although it's been translated that way, but a global implication. It goes beyond tribe, goes beyond race. It even goes beyond history. It has to do with God and God's relationship to human beings around the world. So in Luke, Jesus' announcement that God so loved the world, we don't hear it as radical as it was falling radically upon the ears of those who were Jewish followers. And then Paul came and burst wide open the doors of the implication of the promise of God with us as human beings, and invited what were then called generally the Gentiles, this whole rest of the world. This was a message for everyone, not a message of domination or control, not a message that said we have it the right way and you don't have it the right way, but it was a message that the community that had received the message of Abraham and Sarah and carried with it the sacred journeys of God, now we're clearly called upon to make that message available to the whole world. To the whole world. So, this season we set aside as a season to learn. To learn what we don't know. And that's, sometimes you have to learn what you've already learned. Confucius said that the lessons of life keep coming back around until the student is ready. They get repeated. And so in the spirit of that, broadly, the Christian church around the world said that the church should have a plan. It should have a plan for how young people, new people in the faith, could grow and learn more. And from their learning then be more engaged and their lives be more representative of what Jesus calls us to be. And so we organize our learning program, if you will, around the calendar year. Briefly, it's isolated around the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And then what are the implications? So we are in the part of the year called the season after Epiphany. Epiphany is when the Magi arrived. But there was a light that shone. It was a light from the global universe, and it was seen by the Magi who were not Jewish, and had implications for them, and they became part of the story. And the idea is, in the season of lights, we seek. There it is, just like a clock, my yawn. We seek enlightenment. Enlightenment. If you study recent history, the period of the Enlightenment, that's what was ushered in by science and and uniformed education. And actually, I think coffee was responsible for a lot of the Enlightenment. There's an argument that says that it was caffeine that stimulated the minds of scientists and artists and poets and philosophers to get out beyond themselves, and became the driving force behind the whole arrival of the Enlightenment. I think it remains to be seen whether the learnings of science and technology prove in the long run to be an enlightenment, or whether they prove to be our destruction. But be that as it may, the Dark Ages, as we've referred to them, which preceded the Enlightenment, was a period of time where, first of all, people were struggling with then a global pandemic that they had no idea about. They had no organized way of treating it, no organized way of addressing it. It was just the days were dark. And also, it was a time when learning ceased, when the invasion of the far northern tribes came into Europe. They destroyed the ideas of education and enlightenment. They destroyed the history books. They destroyed the culture, the development of culture. And it was a time of sort of chaotic barbarianism. And, you know, anyway, I'm going too far in that direction. The Enlightenment period, and now on an annual basis, we pray for enlightenment from God. Now, what I was thinking about today, and I was going to talk about this, is that if you read the letters in the New Testament, you know, after you get past the gospel, they're all letters. These are letters that were written by leaders in the Christian community in the first century. And some are written by the people they were credited to, some not, but they were all accepted legitimately in the first century as important works to guide the churches. In the letters, one of the things that I find fascinating, it does appear in the Gospels, but it's in the letters, in Paul's writings, the writings that are given to a man we call the Apostle Paul. They, in their own self-reflection, I don't know, in the old days in the farms, we'd say they were kicking themselves. They're kicking themselves. And what they're kicking themselves about, I don't know, it's not real easy to do. Kick yourself, because you can't get a good wind-up. But they're kicking themselves over this fact alone. When they were with Jesus, they did not see him for who he was. I think it's Paul who says, we did not know him. We walked with him. We ate with him. He invited us to walk with him. We had him at our house. He ate dinner with us. We saw him perform miracles. Things that still astounded them. They're still astounded by the works that he did. And I still think that for them, most of the amazing work was not what he did, but who he did it with. Who he did it with. He healed lepers. Nobody wanted to touch lepers, and he did. And so what Paul and some of the others in the writings of the New Testament are reflecting upon is, it was as if their eyes were covered and they could not see what was present in their life. God in the flesh, as they came to believe, as they came to understand that God had come into their lives and was walking with them, side by side with them in the flesh. They came to believe that. But along with arriving at the point where they believed that, they were aware that they had lived a period of their lives and did not know it. They didn't know it. And It is astounding to them. They are astounded by that realization. At one point, Paul says, God was in Jesus, reconciling the world, bridging the gaps between human beings, groups of human beings, between God and human beings. Reconciling means bringing it together. God was bringing the world together in Jesus, and we didn't see it. You know, the Gospels say they were too busy fighting for position to be Jesus' best friend. They wanted to know after they died which one of them would be seated at Jesus' right hand. And Jesus says, I don't know. You may not want to be on my right side and my left side. And there's a sort of do-do-do-do reference to that picture of the three crosses with, you know, the two crucified, one on either side. They didn't get it. They didn't get it at all. And I think what they realized afterwards was that the possibility was there for them to get it. Or was it? I don't know. Was it hidden from their eyes on purpose? As we look at it now, we see some of the parables and we feel like, well, what was wrong with them that they didn't get what the lesson of the parable was? They don't seem to get it. There's almost a comical sequence in one of the Gospels where Jesus is with, 5,000 men and maybe 5,000 women and children, who knows? It's called the feeding of the 5,000. I think it was the feeding of the 15 or 20,000. And they're out in the wilderness. They came out there to hear Jesus preach, and they're all hungry. They didn't make any provision. They have no food. And Jesus takes, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and in some undescribed miracle, in some way that nobody even tries to say, how did that happen? Some do say that, anyway. Everyone is fed, and there's 13 baskets of food left over. And so they've gone from a place of hunger and wondering about food to having a bounty of food. And not a half a day later, in order to escape the crowds, they get into a boat. They're all in a boat, and they push out into the Sea of Galilee, which can be as rough as the ocean wild. And they're out in the boat, and they start to get worried. They're worried about food. They're worried about food. And Jesus said to them, seriously? Were you not just a half a day ago with me when there were 15,000 people who were hungry and God provided for all of their food, just like in the ancient wilderness? The manna fell from heaven and thousands and thousands of people were sustained in the wilderness by the hand of God, by the manna that fell from heaven. Are you not descendants of those people? Did you not see it? Did you not understand it? Does it not affect your level of worry and feeling that you are alone in this world? This is Jesus' question put back to them. Sometimes Jesus sounds like he's yelling at them, and he says, you just have too little faith. You have too little faith. You don't trust enough. They didn't know. Even when they knew, they didn't know. Even when it was in front of them, they didn't know. They didn't see it. They didn't hear it. They didn't sense it, except after he was gone. When he was gone, they sat around and they talked about their experiences. It's like the road to Emmaus, the two strangers walking on the road to Emmaus. And they're walking along after the crucifixion and the account of the death of Jesus and the despair and gloom that is reigning over all of Jerusalem. and all the thousands of followers who are hopeful for a new world. And these two are walking along talking, and Jesus, not seen by them, he's walking along. Now, they wouldn't have expected to see him because they saw him crucified. But he arrives, he's walking along with them and asks them what they're talking about. And they're saying, what, you didn't know about all the events that have happened in Jerusalem? You don't know about all that stuff? And Jesus says, what stuff? And so they tell him. And then his response is to say, do you have no sense that any of what's happened in Jerusalem follows the narrative of your life and your ancestors' life? Have you know nothing about the Hebrew Scriptures? Because he seems to imply that a lot of what took place, the secrets to it were hidden there in the story itself. There was clues that you could have predicted something of what took place, or at least had some handles for understanding the crucifixion. And so it says he explained it to them. And then they asked him where he was staying for the night. He said he was going to journey on, and they encouraged him to come and at least have supper with them at their house. And when they sat down and they broke bread, they recognized who he was, and then immediately he was gone. And where I'm headed for in this is, they turn to each other in the record and they say, when he was explaining things to us, our hearts were burning in us. And they say, we should have known it was him, because we remember that's how it was when we listened to him teach and when he walked among us. In this week of Epiphany, we're going to be thinking about praying. I said this last week. You pray for enlightenment. You pray for it. It doesn't mean that whatever ideas come along, you go, oh, well, God told me that. That's not what enlightenment is. Enlightenment looks for insight. It looks for a new way of seeing what you already are seeing. It looks for seeing what you couldn't have seen before. Like, I don't know, like a parent whose child graduates and all of a sudden excels in computer technology. And they're reflecting back and they're saying, why didn't we see that in him? We should have known. We should have known his obsession with, erector set or something like that. This is the season now. This is the season when the dark days, 8.5 hours of daylight, are now 9 hours. There's an expansion of light going on. It's a perfect season for us to exercise this discipline, this prayer. Get your pencil and paper out. Write down what you've discovered about your life this year that you didn't know before, or what you learned before but then you forgot it. This is the season for enriching our sense of what we can see now in light of the great revelation of God's unconditional love for us and God's companionship with us in all of life. I hope these thoughts will be helpful to you. Even though the light is returning, these can still be very dark days. If you have a loved one who's in the hospital, I met 2 people today, just in passing, asked how they were. Each one of them has a relative. One is 91 and the other one is just 56. And they are both on respirators in the hospital now. Both of them, our oxygen levels are so dangerously low. I pray for you, for your loved ones. I pray for the people who don't have someone checking on them and looking after them. And pray for the churches, the congregation's ability to be that presence in the world. Don't forget to gather your food for the Super Bowl Sunday. The table is on the front porch. If you're going to bring actual soup, hearty soups, you can bring them, put them on the table in the front, and we'll gather them up there. You can also buy gift cards for the grocery store, and we'll send them along. Or you can send cash contributions for the Center for Food Action for the Super Bowl Soup, S-O-U-P-E-R, Super Bowl food gathering in this season. God bless you, my friends. I will see you tomorrow. I always like to say that. By the way, thanks for bearing with me. I took Martin Luther King Jr. Day off and did some service. Service different than this. And so I appreciate your understanding in that direct sense and for your continued presence on this program. Goodbye now. Blessings.